to see the students from who are not registered in this course, a couple of MSc students, and a very special welcome to the parents we have here today. So we have students' parents, Mr. Elana, welcome, and we have lecturers' parents, so Mr. and Mrs. Bayer in the back, a warm welcome. But our most distinguished guest today came all the way from Huddersfield, is Robert Meyer. Robert is actually Austrian. He's an alumni of MODUL Tourism College, just down the hill. And he started his career working for Austrian Airlines in customer relations and moved to Huddersfield in England 9 years ago. And we just had a chat and he said he's not coming back and he's very happy where he is because he is the course leader of the Division of Logistics and Transport there, and basically mainly teaches transport and tourism management. So a warm welcome, thank you so much for coming all the way to see us, and I'll hand over right to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon everyone. I'm Rob and I really like flying, I like planes, but they're not very good for the environment. So that's a big problem that we have, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, really. So I'm talking about green airline marketing issues, perceptions and developments. And there are a lot of issues because air transport uses a lot of fuel, it emits a lot of emissions, but we all like flying. I guess most of you have flown in the last year. Yeah. So we all do like flying, it's very important for us. But there are also some developments and positive developments. Airlines try to be more environmentally friendly, and also passengers have very different perceptions of airlines depending on how green they are. Now to start with, some breaking news. Well, actually they're not that breaking, they're 2 weeks old, but I don't know if anyone read in the newspaper, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, produced a report stating that about 95%, well, there's a 95% certainty that climate change is related to human behavior. So in other words, it doesn't happen by chance, it's because of how we live. And air transport plays an important role in that respect as well. A few years ago, the IPCC calculated that about 2% of global warming is related to air transport. Now that doesn't sound a lot, but a lot of people don't believe that number. Because if you just purely look at CO2, it is probably 2%. But there are other factors as well. And we can see that in some cases we use a tool called radiative forcing, which looks at how does our behavior affect climate change overall. So not just CO2 emissions. And there the percentage is probably slightly higher at about 5%. And then if we look at developed countries where people fly 5, 6, 7, 10 times a year, probably climate change impact of air travel is even higher. So it's really a very important topic that needs to be addressed because climate change is happening and airlines are partly responsible for that. So what will I talk about today? First of all, I will talk about what is actually green marketing. What do we mean by green marketing? What does it consist of? And the second question is, why do we bother with green marketing? Why do we need to look into green marketing as a company, be it an airline or any other company? And finally, I'll go through the main 3 points, the issues, the perceptions, and the development. I don't know if anyone has come across a guy called Ken Peaty who has written quite a lot on green marketing, and he defined green marketing as a holistic management process responsible for identifying, anticipating, and satisfying the needs of customers and society in a profitable and sustainable way. Now, I've highlighted the green words there because basically what he did is he looked at a marketing book, looked at the definition of marketing, and added a few bits to it. And that's the green part. So basically, it's a holistic management view, so we need to look at probably the bigger picture. It needs to be positive also for society, and it needs to be sustainable. And I think the sustainable bit makes it really difficult to develop green airline marketing. What is sustainability? Does anyone know? Any definitions? Yeah.
Sustainability is based on three big steps like people, social, economical, and
environmental. Yeah. Suppose we've got three elements. We've got social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Now, in my talk, we'll mainly talk about environmental sustainability. But if you talk about social and economic sustainability, there are a lot of questions as well. And I guess you all want to leave by 6:30 or so, because if we include the other elements as well, it will be very, very difficult. And on top of that, so sustainability kind of needs to make sure, if you go for the definition of the Brundtland report, to make sure that future generations have got the same opportunities that we have nowadays, to make sure we don't pollute the air, we don't use non-renewable resources. So there are a lot of criteria to be sustainable. And for air transport, that's very difficult. So on one hand, if we've got green marketing, we try to be sustainable, we try to have this holistic view. And there's another term called greenwash. Has anyone heard of the term greenwash? Okay, no one. So greenwash means when you say you do something for the environment, let's say you paint a car green and say it's an environmentally friendly car, but actually it's the same car that it was before. That would be greenwash. So you claim to be green, but in actual terms, you haven't made a big effort except for painting the car. Probably there are some minor improvements to the product, but overall it's the same product that has the same environmental impact. And somewhere in between there's a line between the two. So we've got green marketing and green wash. And it's a very fine line, so sometimes it's very difficult to say where that line is, and particularly when it comes to airlines. I can't tell you. So you should think, by the time you leave this room, you know where the line is in airline marketing, whether it's green or green wash. I won't be able to tell you that, because it's a very, very thin line. Particularly if you think of companies' objectives. Most companies are profit organizations, so their aim is to generate profit, maximize the profit, having some superior financial performance. They think about shareholder value. If more people buy your car because it's green, painted green, why wouldn't you do that? So we often have got different objectives that companies have, and environmental issues might be important, but if it's a shortcut to just green wash and paint your car green, or in today's lecture, an aircraft green, why wouldn't you do that? So why should we do green marketing? A quote from Bonini and Oppenheim in the Stanford Sustainability Review a few years ago, they say, consumers want to act green, but they expect businesses to lead the way. So in other words, there is a push from consumers to companies that they act in a green way, that they lead the way. And if you think, who goes shopping? Who goes shopping? A few people go shopping. I'm sure you've seen an aisle where you get organic product or Ja Natürlich in Austria. And some people buy that because we expect that from companies that they offer that. So there's a strong push from consumers for green products in some cases. Probably in 1.5 hours we'll see in air transport that might not always be the case. Also, if you think back the last few years with global economic downturn, haven't other things become more important than environmental issues? So probably this quote from 2008 is not 100% valid anymore today because other priorities have taken over. Has anyone heard of Philip Kotler? No one. Kotler. He's like the marketing guru. So basically if you open a marketing book, there's, I'm sure 100%, with 100% certainty, there's somewhere a quote from Kotler, and there's probably an 80% chance that the whole book was written by him. So he's kind of the marketing guru. And also he picked up the environmental theme. And he said marketers have viewed consumers as choosing among brands on the basis of functional and emotional criteria. So we see a change there already in the last few years. Who's got an iPhone? I've got an iPhone. It can do exactly the same thing as many other phones, but it looks pretty, and we like Apple products. So basically emotional things become very important there. But then it goes on, for many of today's consumers, adding a third dimension, namely how the company meets its social responsibilities. So consumers do expect some form of corporate social responsibility from companies. They want to buy products that are good for the environment because it makes consumers feel good about themselves, because they think they can do something for the environment. Let's start with the issues. Lovely aircraft. I like planes, said in the beginning. Now the good news is the clouds behind are not actually fumes, it's just frozen water. So for many years I thought, that picture is not bad for the environment, it's frozen water. I mean, how bad can frozen water be? But actually studies have shown that even these contrails have a negative impact on climate change. But I'll talk about that in a moment. So if we look at kind of different sectors, different products and how environmentally friendly they are, we've kind of a continuum there from deep green products like sustainably managed forests, because they're good for the environment, they don't really harm the environment. We've got companies that really focus on the environment. The Body Shop, for example, has generally an image of being very pro the environment, being very proactive in addressing environmental issues. And then as we go to the right, it's getting worse and worse, up to the very right-hand side, where we've got, as an example, weaponry and tobacco as black products. And I'm very glad that I don't have to talk about green marketing in the weaponry sector, because that would be really difficult. But if you go one to the left, if you look at dark grey products, you've got tourism and transport. So it is very difficult to talk about green airline marketing when actually many people consider transport services as dark grey products. They contribute probably more to the problems than they contribute to the solutions. They have very low sustainability. And if we go back to the original definition of green marketing, where that the sustainability aspect is really important, we will find it very hard to develop that. So the first issue when we talk about green airline marketing is that airlines are not very sustainable. There are a lot of other issues, and they're highlighted by these blue dots, but I thought we can't talk about all the issues. So I thought I would talk about 3 issues that I think are very important. First issue, you and me. As we said before, we all like flying. And because we all like flying, that creates growth, so that's another issue. And because air transport is not very environmentally friendly with regards to the emissions that it produces, we've got the problem of emissions. So I will talk about these 3 issues really. Some parts of the presentation are based on a survey that I did 3 years ago at Liverpool John Lennon Airport, which is in the northwest of England. Has anyone ever flown from the airport? Really? Okay, 2 people. I'm really impressed. Because usually if I go abroad and talk about Liverpool John Lennon Airport, no one knows it. It's quite a small airport for UK size, so about 5 million passengers per year, serving the northwest of England, so conurbations like Liverpool, but also Manchester. So it's basically the second biggest airport around Manchester. And in that survey, I asked over 600 people about their travel behavior, what they thought about the environment, what they thought about different airlines. And the first question was, well, how often, for leisure reasons, did you fly over the last 12 months? You can see the largest bar is 5+. So about 30% of the people who were surveyed said they had flown 5 or more times for leisure reasons in the 12 months leading up to the survey. Then we've got 4 and 3. So if we just take +3, that's 60% of the people travel 3 or more times per year for leisure reasons. So coming back to the initial issue, you and me, we like flying. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, probably people flew once a year for leisure reasons, probably twice. Nowadays, we fly whenever we can. A few years ago, I had some final year students who were in the last year of their bachelor's program, and they had a bit of spare time. So they flew for 50 pence, which is about, I don't know, 60 euro cents, return on Ryanair, because it was a special deal, no credit card fees, 60 cents. They flew to a place called Gdansk. Does anyone know where Gdansk is? They didn't know where it was, somewhere in northern Poland. They didn't know where it was, but they flew there because it was cheap. And particularly low-cost airlines have really that impact on our behavior. We see a cheap price, if you even say 50 euros to Paris. Why shouldn't I do that? I could be in Vienna or I could be in Paris. Well, people in Paris will think, I could be in Vienna, not in Paris. Let's fly to Vienna for 50 euros. So prices have come down and we started flying a lot because we like it, even if we don't know where we're going. Now, I also asked, well, how about your future travel behavior? Are you planning to fly more in future or less? 24% said in the next few years they're planning to fly even more. And as we saw on the previous graph, already a lot of people like flying. But 2/3 said they would fly at about the same, and only 8%, roughly 8%, said they would fly less. So my guess, out of the 600 people, how many people said they would fly less for environmental reasons? Out of 600 people, how many would say they fly less for environmental reasons? Huh? 7. No, but people. So less than 10? Nobody? 7? It's somewhere between nobody and 7. It's 2. 2 out of 600 people said they would fly less for environmental reasons. Obviously, the 7.8 includes flying less for other reasons as well. But only 2 out of 600 said they would fly less for environmental reasons. And you all said you've flown in the last year. I've flown a lot in the last year. And I guess most of us, when we press a button, book, we don't think, should I really book? Is it good for the environment? That's not what comes to our mind when we book. Now the interesting thing is, if you look at the graph, I also asked them about how their previous flying behavior has changed. So 2 years up to the survey. And there, 40% of respondents said in the previous 2 years they had increased the number of flights they took. So we'd fly more often, and very few of us, when we book, think, oh, I should fly less for environmental reasons. So does it mean people think environmental impacts are not important? Because basically, we all like flying, we fly more, we press the button, we book, and we don't care about the environment. So do we just think the environment is not important? Interestingly enough, that's not the case either. So about 60% of the people that are surveyed said, yes, air travel is a significant contributor to climate change. So a lot of people think, yes, it has an impact on the environment. And you can see quite a big portion is also unsure, they neither agree nor disagree, and only 10% disagree that air travel is a significant contributor to climate change. And then we've got another big issue when it comes to green airline marketing. To make green to be sustainable, on one hand we say, yes, it's bad for the environment, but as soon as we get on the internet and book our flight, that doesn't count anymore. So in that respect, we've got basically 3 issues. First of all, what some people call an attitude-behavior gap. Yes, attitude, we've got the attitude, air travel is bad for the environment. Yes, we need to do something, but we don't behave in that way. That's one issue. The other issue is an awareness behavior gap. So some people might think, oh yes, well, there is an awareness that air travel contributes to climate change, but I don't think really we should do something, or it's out for other people to do it. Now, my favorite basically in this respect is air travel is a behavioral addiction. It's like smoking. Because when you smoke, you know it's bad for you, and you still do it. When you fly, you know it's bad for the environment, you still do it, because it has become a habit. We like doing it. It's become a very important part of how we live. So that's one of the big issues that we have, that actually as consumers we don't care about the environment when we book that particular flight. We might care about it before. Some of us might even feel guilty afterwards, but when we book the flight, when we go on the trip, the environment is not that important. To summarize, I've got a really nice quote here which really highlights the key issue. Continued growth in both frequent flying practices and the concern over air travel's climate impacts are in a dynamic relationship. And the question whether one or the other will reach a tipping point can not yet be determined. In other words, probably in future, as we can see that we are more and more affected by climate change, the area where I live usually gets flooded in summer, winter, anytime really nowadays. So there are quite a lot of floods happening, and a lot of people say it's because of climate change. So probably as more people get affected by climate change, we can see that people start to think, probably I shouldn't go on my 5th flight to Paris, or probably I should change it. But at the moment, it's quite uncertain in what way it will go. And because we all like to fly a lot, we see the growth in air travel. Another nice quote here. Airlines as businesses in the globalizing, liberalized marketplace have no rational alternative but to cater for existing demand in ways that are most profitable while fostering future demand. Remember, airlines are not charities. They're here to make money. They're for-profit organizations. If we all decide we want to fly 5 times to Paris, the airline will fly 5 times to Paris. Because they have no other choice as an airline. Because why? When they've got a responsibility to their shareholders, when their aim is to maximize the profits, why wouldn't they do that? So I think if you look at it from the airline perspective, they're in a very difficult situation as well. They can't say, oh, because it's bad for the environment, we're not flying there. Because that's not why they're there. And to continue with that quote, in that conundrum lies the principal dilemma compromising the entire idea of sustainable aviation. So that is one of the key issues, because airlines will offer more seats, they will fly more often if there's more demand. And that's why I started talking about you and me as one of the first issues, because one of the main reasons why we saw growth in air travel is because more people like to travel. And that graph just really highlights the growth of air transport over the last few years. The bottom line shows growth of world GDP, so basically overall economic growth, which since the 1970s grew by about 3 or 4 times, which is quite good. If you look at air travel, the dark blue line, which is measured in revenue passenger kilometers, which is basically a measure for passenger demand, that has grown 10 times. So air travel has grown much faster in the last 30, 40 years or so than the overall economy. And then the the very light line is freight travel. Freight transport, air freight transport, that has grown even faster. But I'm not going to talk about air freight today. But just bear in mind, we see a huge growth in the industry, much faster growth than growth of the overall economy. And because we see that growth, there are a lot of emissions attached to that. So we've got CO2, nitrous oxides, water, sulfur oxide, soot, noise, and these are just the main emissions. A big problem that we have in air transport as well, if we take, for example, CO2. Most scientists probably know how bad CO2 is for the environment. The problem with air transport is CO2 emissions are not at ground level, they are up in the air, in a completely different environment, and therefore the damage might be even bigger. Also because CO2 is not emitted alone, but together with some of the other emissions, so there might be some combination effects of several factors, which has an even bigger impact on the environment. So you can see there's quite a lot of different environmental issues that need to be addressed. The last one, noise, actually, I think in the last few years, airlines have been quite good. My best friend lives next to the runway in Heathrow. Heathrow, biggest airport in Europe. And when I talk about next to the runway, I really mean next to the runway. If you use his toilet, you can wave at aircraft. And that's not a joke, it's really the case. And he can tell whether a new aircraft takes off or an old aircraft. He can actually say what type of aircraft it is. And actually new aircraft have come quite a long way. So if you think of the Airbus A380, the largest passenger aircraft, he says it's really good. It makes such a difference whether an A380 takes off or whether a Boeing 747 takes off. So actually we've come quite a long way with regards to noise. Because noise has been an issue basically since ever air travel started. In the last few years, the other things have become more important because we're dealing with noise to some extent, but the others are much harder to address. You can see also CO2 emissions are forecast, air transport CO2 emissions are forecasted to grow. Last week or this week, there was a big press release. The air transport industry has come to some agreement about future air travel emissions, and they're working with a benchmark as a benchmark from the year 2020. So basically, from 2020, the industry can grow, and then they try to do something about it. But if you look at the different lines, and the different lines, whether the dark green line, the lighter shades, the blue, the dotted line, they all show different scenarios with regards to what the industry does, how demand behaves, what kind of economic measures are taken. And even with all these measures, we still are far away from that target of 2020 emissions. So emissions growth is a big issue because the industry is growing, and at the moment there's nothing that can stop it. None of the measures that they take will take us to where we want to be. So basically, to sum up, green is in one direction, air transport is in the other direction. And before everyone leaves here and think, oh my God, I will never fly again, I've got some positive things as well coming up, so don't worry, it's not all bad news. But it just shows that green airline marketing is not an easy task. So there could be claims of greenwash, painting an aircraft green and saying it's more environmentally friendly. Does it really make a difference to the environment, particularly if we say that air transport only contributes to 2, 3, 4, 5% of CO2 emissions? Does it make business sense to actually focus on green airline marketing? Because we all book anyway. And do we actually appreciate as travelers whether airlines do something for the environment? And that leads to the next point. What do people think about green airline marketing? What are the perceptions that people have of airlines with regards to how green they are and what they can do to address the environmental impact of air travel? So probably the first thing is, are there any differences between airlines with regards to the environmental image? Are some airlines seen as more environmentally friendly than others? What do you think? Do you perceive some airlines as more environmentally friendly than others, or are they all the same? Okay, so some airlines have new aircraft, some have old aircraft. Very good answer. Someone says the same.
Well, I would say that all airlines are not good for the environment, so they're all in one pot.
Okay, so they're all as bad as each other. Okay. Yeah. Yes, that's a very interesting point. Before I started my survey, I also had in my mind low-cost airlines will be seen as worse than full-service airlines. That was my perception of what people think. I think most people will think low-cost airlines, because they're cheap, they must be bad for the environment. Very interesting point, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah.
First of all, Emirates was the greenest airline at the moment, the last time I checked, because they were really trying to, inform people and the passengers about it. Plus, I think Emirates is also the first airlines to get the so-called green Boeings, the Boeing 737, maybe 747, I'm not sure of the name. And the problem is that even if all of the airlines decided to go green, it takes a 10-year-long process for the airline to order the shipment and actually get the green airplanes. So it's practically impossible for all the airlines to go green and satisfy the customers that
very quickly. That's a very good point. So two things. So Emirates is a very controversial airline. I think there are globally two airlines that really managed to spark a discussion in the room. One is Emirates, the other one is Ryanair. If you mention the word Ryanair, people automatically start a discussion. I think obviously Emirates has very new aircraft and therefore the emissions are quite low. One could argue, because they undercut all the other airlines, generates new demand, and that is bad for the environment. So, but they've got new aircraft, and as I said, it would be very difficult for all airlines suddenly to order new aircraft. And to be honest, most airlines couldn't afford it anyway. But that's a good point.
Maybe even if there's more people in one aircraft, so it's like environmental better than if less people would fit in an aircraft.
Spot on, that's a fantastic answer. I talk about that in the as well. So putting more people in that metal tube is usually good for the environment if you leave the tube at the same size. Yeah.
It just depends on the aircraft because the airline had, presumably fly to less destinations, then of course you will produce less pollution.
Okay, size of the aircraft, that's quite interesting. I've never thought of it from that way, but the data that I will show you probably shows that particularly small airlines find it more difficult to be seen as environmentally friendly because they don't have that much money to spend on telling everyone how good they are. But it could be seen from that perspective as well. So basically, for my survey at Liverpool Airport, I mainly focused on airlines that were flying to Liverpool and the airlines that I knew that people would know. And so I've got Virgin Atlantic, EasyJet, British Airways, KLM, BMI Baby. Both of them, BMI and BMI Baby, have disappeared now. Then we've got Flybe, Thomson Airways, Eastern Airways, Thomas Cook, Wizz and Ryanair. The colours have nothing to do with how green they are. It just means that the green airlines are the low-cost airlines, the pink ones are the full-service or high-cost airlines, or however you want to call them. The yellow ones are the charter airlines, and the blue ones are the regional carriers, so the smaller ones. And actually, that already shows that actually being a low-cost airline doesn't necessarily mean that people think you're bad for the environment. So if you look at EasyJet, so generally the higher the bars, the friendlier, the lower, the less environmentally friendly the airline is perceived. So remember, that's just perceptions of travelers. It's not how environmentally friendly they really are, it's just what people think of them. And number one is Virgin Atlantic, and interesting enough, Richard Branson, have you heard of Richard Branson? He's the founder of Virgin. He was actually in Vienna 2 days ago. But seen as very environmentally friendly. A low-cost airline, EasyJet, very environmentally friendly. If we go to the right-hand side, Ryanair. That's probably not surprising, because as a lot of people love to hate them. And if they think they're bad for the environment, it makes people good about that. But it's not that easy, I'm afraid. But so generally, we can see that passengers perceive some airlines as more environmentally friendly than others. So the next question is, what marketing measures can airlines use so that people think that's good for the environment? So again, it's about perceptions, what people think about what airlines can introduce to be more environmentally friendly. And there's a range of different things that in my survey I use. These newer aircraft, quite a few of you mentioned newer aircraft, biofuels, having a positive attitude about the environment, offering carbon offsetting, promoting public transport to reach the airport, propeller aircraft, increasing the number of seats on an aircraft, offering fair trade in organic products, and not offering free food, and therefore producing less waste. So these are all things in my survey that I suggest to people. Now, how many people think that having new aircraft is the best way out of these? Hands up. 2, 3, 4, not many. How many people think that biofuel is the best way to address the issue? Okay, a few more. How many people think that having a positive attitude towards the environment is one way forward? 1 person. 2, good. Carbon offsetting. I'll talk about what it is a little bit later. 2, promoting public transport to reach the airport. Okay, about 4, 5. Propeller aircraft. No one. Okay. Increasing the seats per aircraft. About 10. Fair trade products. 1, no one. Okay, I'm not surprised there, to be honest. And not offering free food and therefore reducing the waste. 2, okay. Now, here are the results from my survey. That's number 1 was having newer aircraft. Number 2 was having a positive attitude, which I find very interesting because basically in the survey, all I wrote is having airlines that have a positive attitude towards the environment. I didn't say what that means. It's just an airline saying, we're good for the environment. It could be, it's just, this is from the customer's perspective. So it's just, if an airline says, we do something for the environment, people think that's good. So it could be greenwash, but it doesn't have to be. So basically this would tell you that you might get away with greenwash, because people don't question it. So if you say you're good for the environment, people think that's a good way forward. Interesting enough, on the right-hand side, no free food and propeller aircraft are seen as the probably least effective out of these 9 measures. Bear the propeller aircraft in mind because we'll talk about them a little bit later. Now, perceptions are really important, as already highlighted by Kotler as well, where he says in marketing, perceptions are more important than reality because perceptions affect consumers' actual behavior. And that's again from a marketing perspective, it's very important to know what do people think. It's if you just purely look at kind of marketing perspective, leaving environmental issues away, these perceptions are important. If we go back to the green marketing definition, we said you need to have that element of sustainability, probably this will not work because it also needs to have a positive impact on the environment. But just if you want to promote yourself as being environmentally friendly, it just is enough for people to think that you do something for the environment. So let's have some examples about perceptions versus reality. We mentioned new aircraft, very popular with people. And you could argue that usually if you increase newer aircraft, you can achieve fuel savings of less than 1%. So you do get some fuel savings, but just focusing on newer aircraft will not solve the problem. So it's relatively low, the benefits that you get. Yet passengers rated it very highly. It was the top measure that can be introduced. Hands up again, who thinks that new aircraft are very important for addressing the environment? Okay, it's now a bit fewer than before. Now, remember, in the survey, that was the most popular. Let's have a look at reality. Here you've got the average aircraft age of the 12 airlines in 2000, and here you've got the environmentally friendliness. So the lower the number here, the more environmentally friendly that the airline is perceived. The higher it is, the worse. Now, you would expect that there's a line going from the bottom left to the top right-hand corner. Because we said new aircraft are seen as very environmentally friendly. However, in reality, we see that doesn't play any real impact on the image of the airlines. Up here, we've got two airlines, Ryanair and Wizz Air. Very new aircraft. On average, less than 5 years old. Yet the worst environmental image among all of these airlines. If we look at bottom here, that's Virgin Atlantic. Seen as the best airline for environmental image, yet by far not the youngest fleet. So while people perceive that having new aircraft is very important, in reality when they rate airlines, it's not so clear. We mentioned putting more seats on the aircraft. That was only ranked 6th out of the 9 measures that I suggested before. Yet a 1% increase in the number of seats on an aircraft can reduce CO2 emissions per passenger kilometers by about 0.3%, which is not too bad. So 1% increase in the number of seats, you can reduce emissions by 0.3%. But what's even better, and I think you've mentioned it before, is getting more passengers on that aircraft. If you get 1% more passengers on an aircraft, you can reduce CO2 emissions per passenger kilometer by 1%. That's great. What's the problem?
Customer satisfaction.
So that's one thing, customer satisfaction, because obviously the more passengers on the plane, the less space you have.
And more fuel?
Probably more fuel, but that's already taken into account here. Well, yeah, basically, that's the key issue behind it. The maximum you can get is to 100%. If all the airlines would get to 100%, you can't use that measure anymore to improve your environmental credentials. There's a ceiling to that. And in reality, no airline achieves 100% on average anyway. Low-cost airlines might get low 90s, like 92, 93%. Charter airlines probably 95%. But basically, over the last 10, 15 years or so, we see that many airlines were able to improve the load factors. And therefore, actually, the CO2 emissions per passengers have gone down. But we won't see the same increase in load factors in future. So, well, that's very good. There's a ceiling to that, and we won't see that in future. Then you mentioned the turboprops. No one in this room liked turboprops, because no one said that's good for the environment. It's the second last out of the 9 measures that I suggested. But a study in the United States came up with this. Flying between Los Angeles and San Francisco in a 50-seat regional jet consumes 925 gallons of fuel. A 140-seat narrow body, something like Southwest, uses 1,083 gallons. A 72-seater turboprop burns only 297 gallons of fuel. So actually, propeller aircraft on certain routes, obviously you can't fly from Vienna to New York in a propeller aircraft, but on short routes like from Vienna to Salzburg, from Vienna to Munich, from Vienna to Budapest, that's actually very environmentally friendly because the fuel burn is much lower. The problem is, if you remember when I asked you how many people think propeller aircraft are good, no one raised their hands, and one reason might be because people don't like flying with them. In my survey, 25% of the respondents, it's a quarter of the market, said they don't like flying with propeller aircraft. Now if you as an airline think, oh, it's very good for the environment and even better, it's good for their pocket, let's put a lot of propeller aircraft on the route, you might end up with not a lot of passengers flying with you. Just going back a few slides. remember Flybe? Has anyone heard of Flybe? It's a British regional low-cost airline. In the last 8 years or so, they have spent a lot of money. I think they've spent $2 billion on new aircraft, and they fly the largest propeller fleet of the Dash Q8400 propeller aircraft in the world. They put a lot of focus on the propeller aircraft, and they say that's environmentally friendly. Does it impact the environmental image? Not really, they're somewhere in the middle. So though focusing on something that's very good for the environment, if it's not perceived as environmentally friendly, that can cause some issues. Yeah?
But is it enterprise? Do they help people?
Very good question. Let's have a look at the next slide. So basically, as I said, well, they paint their aircraft green, low cost, but not at any cost. So they really advertise. If you go on their website, book it, you even get some information about the CO2 emissions. They do advertise. They produce leaflets. But people think it's not really making a big difference. What's the point? If people say, I don't want to get on a propeller aircraft because it's like traveling 50 years ago, people will not do it. People think they're slow. And these aircraft are slower than a jet aircraft. But if you fly from Vienna to Budapest, that's probably 2 or 3 minutes. You wouldn't notice. But there's a perception there that they're old, they're loud, they're noisy, they're not environmentally friendly. Which takes us to the last point, the developments. So one development, as we see in this case, painting your aircraft green. Not sure how successful that is though. Out of the airlines that I've looked at, some airlines really put a lot of effort into green aspects. I've mentioned Virgin Atlantic. And Virgin Atlantic actually has put a lot of effort in green marketing. And they also perceived as environmentally friendly by passengers. Another example would be SAS, which is a Scandinavian airline. It's quite interesting with SAS because one reason why they focus on green aspects is not only to be seen as green, but they also refer that back to their Scandinavian culture, where caring for the environment plays a very important role in their day-to-day living. It's part of the nature of how people are. At least that's how they advertise it. Then there's EasyJet, and they did quite well as well in the survey. They were number 2. And EasyJet, particularly 2-3 years ago, they put a lot of effort on saying we are for the environment. And what I personally like about EasyJet is they were very critical as well. They said, we care about the environment, we do something for the environment. One reason is because it's good for the environment. Another reason is because it's good for our pockets. And another reason is because if we are seen to be doing something for the environment, the regulators, the government, leaves us alone. So I think they're quite honest in many respects. They say we're not only doing it because it's good for the environment, but we also do it because there's a business benefit for us there. And then we've got Flybe, and as I said, Flybe, quite proactive, but didn't manage to translate that into a positive environmental image. Yeah. Yeah. I have that on the 2 slides. I'll talk about carbon offsetting, because that's something that airlines use a lot. But you can see, if you look at the marketing developments or green marketing developments in air transport, there are lots of them. So you've got something called single engine taxiing, which basically means when you leave the gate, on the way from the gate to the runway, the aircraft will not use both engines, or all 4 engines, but only one, and therefore use less fuel and produce fewer emissions. Airlines use biofuels. SAS, the Scandinavian airline, put a YouTube video on saying we're positive about the environment, we do a lot, so quite new. Some use carbon offsetting. Some airlines have managed to achieve higher load factors. Some airlines even put newspaper ads in the newspaper saying, we are very good for the environment, fly with us. Some have introduced on-board recycling. BMI Baby bought electric cars, because they can say we use electric cars. Some buy newer aircraft, some have got eco-labels, and some produce, well, most of them nowadays produce CSR, so corporate social responsibility reports, just say what they're doing for the environment. As you can see, there are loads of different developments going on, and we don't have time to go through all of them, so I'll just focus on a few. Eco-labels, again here we've got the propeller aircraft of Flybe. Flybe has been very proactive in that respect, and they say, well, our propeller aircraft has an A label, they're very good for the environment, and we all would expect that from them. If you had to produce an eco-label about your own aircraft, wouldn't you give it an A? Probably most likely. So there are some issues with eco-labels. Are they credible? Is it objective? So basically, wouldn't Flybe do that anyway? How reliable is it? What do we know about the numbers behind it, about the figures? So often eco-labels, you need some kind of external assessor, and Flybe went so far, they actually used Deloitte & Touche, the law firm, to assess and be an external validator of their eco-label. So in other words, they say, well, it's not only just us who produces these eco-labels, it's actually an external company says, that's a good label. And when you book with Flybe, you get to know what the rating for your aircraft is. However, I think probably none of their passengers will ever go to the Deloitte & Touche website and actually check if it's true. So people are kind of, as we said before, when they click the press book button, they don't really think about the environment. And that's for another reason why it's less important for Flybe why they couldn't generate a positive green image. Newspaper ads. We care about the environment. Do you too? EasyJet. That was a full-size newspaper ad in the Times, quite large British newspaper, about 5-6 years ago. So that shows it is actually quite important, and they say what they've done for the environment, why they care. But with newspaper ads, they need to be true. Because if they're not true, if you make things up, people will complain. Probably not the travelers, but some pressure groups, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, they will say, hey, what you're saying is not true. And they will go to, in the UK it's called the Advertising Standards Agency, but every country will have some kind of advertising regulator. And sometimes these regulators say to the airline, you can't do that. Interesting thing is with this one, this was also taken to the Advertising Standards Agency because someone complained about it. Because somewhere in there it says aviation accounts for 1.6% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and whoever complained saying it's not true. And to be honest, I don't think it's true. But there's a report from the IPCC produced in the 1990s which quotes that figure. So the airline was able to say, well, we've got that figure from that report, it's internationally accepted, most people read that, therefore it shouldn't be questioned. And actually, in this case, the airline won, and they were allowed to use that newspaper ad. Carbon offsetting, that was a question, what is carbon offsetting? Carbon offsetting is a voluntary scheme, so you're not forced to, but you can pay for your CO2 emissions. So in other words, when you book a flight, you sometimes have an option, add £5 or €5 or add €10, and therefore something will be done to offset your carbon emission, or basically to mitigate your emissions. So probably someone will plant a tree somewhere in the world, and that will absorb the carbon, and therefore you can fly. And there are quite a lot of kind of carbon programs out there, and some are certified by different organizations, and some are probably very good. And it's very popular with airlines as well. So there are over 30 IATA airlines. IATA is where most full-service network airlines work together. They offer that. Even low-cost airlines offer that. So in the beginning we had the question, do low-cost airlines care about the environment? Well, if you go on the EasyJet website, you can pay for carbon offsetting. But the problem is, generally there's a very low uptake of passengers. Who has heard of carbon offsetting before? Those of you who've heard about it, how many have actually used it when flying? Okay. Actually more than I expected. So generally, globally, we think that between 3 and 8% of passengers use carbon offsetting. So very few of us are not even prepared to pay €5, €10 for the environmental impact. And one issue could be that some people think it's not that good or doesn't make any big differences. Biofuels, also very popular, said it was one of the top 3 measures that airlines can introduce. And you can see a lot of the airlines have started testing biofuels, and big airlines. And interesting enough, we've also got Qatar Airways and Etihad from the Middle East, where you would expect, well, why would Middle Eastern carriers care about biofuels? because they've got a lot of oil underneath them anyway. But even these airlines have identified that investing in biofuels, first of all, probably makes business sense in the sense that people like seeing that, but also in the long run, you might be able to achieve benefits. So a lot of different airlines like to focus on biofuels because people see it as effective. But there are some issues, ethical issues. So if you've got a field and you produce biofuel, you know we've got in many parts of the world hunger, starvation, people don't have enough to eat. Is it ethical to use that field